This is a production of Cornell University.
Welcome back to week 6. Can you believe we've been locked up for 6 weeks already? You can talk to my family if you want to know more about details with that. Yeah. Okay, welcome. Guys are really, I got this from a British groundskeeper the other day who sent it around. We're so glad that you can be with us. We hope that you're safe. We hope that these things continue to inform you, maybe distract you, maybe help you do things better in these enormously difficult times. So, and of course, in New York's good New York style, right? Who doesn't like a good New York saying, as you're entering one of the many bridges and tunnels that traverse the New York metropolitan area. So again, big shout out to our brothers and sisters in the New York metropolitan area, where those of us in New York know particularly that it's, currently hitting the hardest still. So good luck and especially for the lawn and landscape crews that are out there trying to work safe. I'm not going to waste a lot of time with getting through much of growing, because I want to hear from Joellen about ticks, and I want to talk to you about what we've been learning and revisiting something, oddly enough, I did in my graduate work over 30 years ago now. So it's funny how things come back around. But let's start with soil temperature. This is what it was like about 3-4 weeks ago when we got together, and it looked like in early April, everybody was going to run out and put the pre's out, right? I mean, if we know crabgrass germination is somewhere in the 55-degree soil temperature range, which we'll talk about that in a minute, and I'm not even worried necessarily about when it happens. I want to talk about the way it happens today. But if you looked at this map back then and wasn't paying attention to the forecast, or was, nervous about being locked down and went out and put your pre-emergent herbicides, they would have basically sat there for 3 weeks with virtually, maybe leaching through a little bit, maybe breaking down a little bit, especially in urban areas where the heat island effect can take over. But really, soil temperatures didn't progress very much. You had a lot of time from the early sort of trigger we use to even where we are now. And we're not expecting to see this change dramatically. We're way behind normal. We're going to catch up a little bit this week, right? But when you look at weed control in general, right, we're still, this is for the 6th of May. This is 5 days from now. We're expecting broadleaf weed control, roughly about 150 base, 50 growing degree days that we accumulate since March 1st, right? Basically, we're not going to see that again for a little while, right? We've talked about growth potential, and we've learned a lot this week. If anybody that joins us for all of these things is getting quite a turfgrass education. These days, we had Doug Soldat with us for the Golf Course Superintendents Association of New York Symposium, talking for about 40 minutes about nitrogen and turfgrass growth. And while he likes growth potential as an annual model, doesn't really like it for a sort of daily or weekly model. And they're developing models about how grass grows. But here's what we know. Weather drives it. You can put as much fertilizer on it as you want. You could dump the whole bag in a particular area. It'll likely burn it, but it won't really get growing until the weather conditions are right. We were very interested to see how little soil nitrogen and applied nitrogen mattered for growth of grass versus relative humidity, temperature, and other factors. All right, Joellen, before I get to my crabgrass conversation, with that as a backdrop and with really not much evolving moving forward this coming week, you want to talk to us a little bit as we get out and about? And, this is important in the lawn and landscape area as you share your screen and maybe show the life cycle, because we've got some information now that says piling leaves along the edge of the woods, is a better tick habitat. Not surprisingly. Now, that's maybe one particular tick. So as people venture out, let's talk a little bit about where ticks are right now and what you're expecting soon.
Okay, so I am going to share my screen. And you mentioned that there is more than one type of tick. which is something that we absolutely have to keep in mind. So, Carl, I don't think that I can do this yet.
Carl, you got to make her a co-host, I think.
Yeah, let me. You are a co-host, Joellen. Can you see?
Oh, okay. I got it now.
Okay. There we go.
Okay, so what I'm showing you here, the 4 ticks that we're really worried about in New York right now is the black-legged tick, also known erroneously as the deer tick, the American dog tick, the Lonestar tick, and the Asian longhorn tick. So up here I have this table that shows when the different life stages of these are going to be most active. So here we are at the beginning of May, and pretty much everything can be out there right now, but what we're most worried about are the black-legged ticks, because those are the ones that can transmit Lyme disease, which is the most common tick-borne pathogen that we have out there. So we have the adults. We've had a mild winter, so the adult black-legged ticks were pretty much active up until now. At some point soon, they're going to run out of energy and they're going to start dying off because they don't have enough energy to continue on. But right now, research has shown that they are desperate because they want to find that final blood meal and mate, and that drive is very strong. So their energy level has been kicked into high gear, and they also are going to take more risks. So we're more likely to find adult black-legged ticks in areas that we wouldn't normally find them, such as in the middle of our lawns, because we're just following carbon dioxide and other clues looking for something. But now is also the time that the black-legged tick nymphs come out. So this is the second life stage. They're the size of poppy seeds, and they have had one blood meal. So there is a chance that they could be carrying the pathogens that cause these diseases. And because they're so small, we're at a high risk of coming into contact with them, bit by them because we're not looking for them. And there's still this thought that ticks are a summer issue. So ticks are not on people's radar screens. So right now we've got the nymphs and the black-legged ticks, and that's really the only ones that I've gotten people reporting to me that they've been finding out there. But as you can see from this chart, the American dog ticks are also becoming active. And for those downstate, we have the Lonestar ticks and the Asian longhorn ticks that can get going. This is going to be an interesting year because so many of us are shut down and not able to do our field work. So we're going to not be as up to date with what these other tick species are doing as we might in normal years.
Okay.
Yep. And as you mentioned, they're going to be mostly, the black-legged ticks are going to be near the woods and in the leaf litter. So if you still have leaf litter piled up along your woodland edge, that's a really good project for you to take on and to offer to your clients to get rid of those leaves, because that will reduce tick habitat.
So what about, listen, we've chatted about this many times, you and I, publicly, privately. There's 2 issues. One is there doesn't seem to be anything better than personal protection and reviewing your body after you think you've been in areas or even outside, now that we've learned ticks are such risk takers. Who knew? Second, people ask about treating. A lot of people offer services for treating. We could spend another half an hour talking about those 2 particular topics, but certainly protection, extreme as treated clothing, watching, cleaning yourself, dealing with your clothes, that seems to still be the best thing, but people still offer the treatments. So you want to just take a minute and talk about balancing those 2 things?
Sure. So there's been a lot of research that has been done on treatment. This was some work that we funded that was taken up by Suffolk County. And they were looking at different products that were out there, including natural products, and comparing it to the more traditional pesticides that we would use. There's a lot of numbers here. what I want you to really notice is that on the left-hand side, this is the lab work. So this is where you take your ticks and you put pesticides directly on them. And you can see even with the more natural products, the Essentia IC3, which is a lot of plant essential oils, and Cedar Safe, which is cedar oil, we have some pretty high numbers there for control. Whether 88% is good enough, I don't think so, because it only takes one to give you a pathogen. But when we take those same products and we take them out into the field and we apply them in a way that you would with your sprayer out in the environment, those numbers go much, much lower. So it goes from 100% control with black-legged tick nymphs, with Telstar, and then it goes down to 65% when we go out into the field. And then if we're talking about a different type of tick for Lonestar Ticks, which is the Americanum there, those numbers go down even farther. So knowing what you have, what life stage you're trying to treat is very important. Also, research has shown that going out and killing 72% of the ticks that are out there is not going to protect people from tick-borne diseases. So you can go out and treat, it's going to reduce your risk, but boy, you've got to tell your clients that they still need to do personal protection because it's not 100% guaranteed. Permethrin treated clothing, you mentioned that that's kind of extreme. Actually, it is the best thing that you can do.
Very good.
And it's on your clothing as opposed to things like DEET that you're putting onto your skin, which if you're celebrating Nude Gardening Day, the DEET. But I would much more highly recommend the permethrin treated clothing.
So, you know, I was talking to Bob Emmons. Many people know Bob as our old professor at SUNY Cobleskill, retired, 15, 16 years now, still active and busy in Maine. And Maine is a hot spot, especially coastal Maine is a hot spot for ticks. And he said to me, we were chatting about this, and he said to me what you said there. He goes, I spray my clothes so regularly with permethrin, I don't even really notice it anymore because he lives in the woods. They live in the woods in Maine, and the risk is high. So yes, it may not be extreme. I think it is the discussion we need to have. Everything may reduce your risk. There's no zero risk, right? That's why checking yourself and being protected is so important.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's leave it at that.
And also protecting your pets as well. Because their pets are coming inside and they're bringing the ticks with them. So talk to your vet, find out what their recommendations are, and follow their advice to get your pets protected.
Well, all right, now you brought it up. I put a spot on my dog's back neck. Doesn't that help me for ticks?
It does. Well, it depends on the product. So still check your pets, but make sure that you're putting some kind of protection on them on the advice of your veterinarian.
Yes. I mean, I've got 2 dogs that are just walking tick magnets. If they go anywhere near it, they're dead usually with at least what we treat them with. And I'm not a vet or any of those things. But listen, especially if you let your dog on your bed, your dog on your couch, your dog in your chair, you hug your dog, you ride in a car with your dog, all those places is where the tick goes. Yes, Joellen?
Absolutely.
And they're happy to jump off onto you.
Hair was in my bed. It was dead. It had come in on my cat, but it was very disturbing.
Okay. Let me have the screen back. We'll talk about things before this gets gross. And Joellen, how I hate the gross pictures you show in your presentation.
Yes, I know. And I avoided those today.
Thank you.
Just for you.
All right. So let's chat about crabgrass here and see if there's any questions in this area as well as we move forward. All right. We are in the time when crabgrass, as I was putting this together, I'm like, okay, I don't want to have I don't want to talk more than 10, 15 minutes because we knew we were going to have Joellen, talk a little bit about the weather. So I started looking at, all right, how do I want to talk about emergence of weeds in the springtime? Now, you can run the gamut on this, right? Certainly, we're learning now stiltgrass is emerging. Some people I believe I heard someone refer to stiltgrass as crabgrass in the shade, Japanese stiltgrass that is. It seems to be a growing pest problem. in the metropolitan New York area. Seems to germinate a little bit earlier. That's at least what we hear. But we also hear that it sometimes germinates later. At least that's what we hear. Crabgrass comes in both smooth and large format. Smooth is very common along the coast. As you move inland and into the Midwest, you tend to see more large, but smooth crabgrass, by many of the surveys we published back 30 years ago, is the predominant crabgrass we find in the lawns in most of the northeastern United States. You south and west you go, you get more large. And then there's goosegrass, which comes up even later, maybe 2 to 3 weeks later, depending on the condition the turf is in and the soil temperature and the way it's exposed and the weather conditions. So in general, it works stiltgrass and then crabgrass and then goosegrass. And then there's kylinga and there's a whole, obviously many things emerge. But most of what emerges that we're dealing with are annuals to some degree that are going to go through the summer, grow, flower, and die. Now, stiltgrass is a little bit different than that. But in general, because stiltgrass, it's a C4 plant. It's one of those odd plants that is a warm season plant but tolerates low light. We wonder, as this thing emerges, the kind of sense it might make for us moving forward. Anyway, the long and the short of it is, we think of emergence as a distinct event. And I want to talk a lot about that and how, by understanding the pattern of the way emergence and development occurs, it broadens and expands our control options away from the proverbial, pre-emergence. And I'll talk a little bit about why that concerns me. All right, let's do some old style slide stuff I have, from the archives here. A really simple slide about summer annual weeds. They germinate from seed in the spring. They grow through the summer, and they in the late season they flower and prolifically. 10,000 seedlings emerged in a lawn in Ontario in a 10 square foot area. 10,000 plants emerged in a 10 square foot area in one growing season. And I'll show you some data from our graduate student here, now an employee asset manager, research and asset manager out at the Vineyard Golf Club. All right, so if you don't put pre-emergent herbicides down and you disturb the soil and there's no competition between the rows, you get a lot of weeds growing. Look at what happens in these cabbage, broccoli plots where there was no weeding performed at all. And then you look back at the plots here where some pre-emergent control was applied, and you see when you really have no plant competition, look at the unfettered emergence that will occur. The soil is, especially at the surface, is enormously loaded with these weed seeds. Now, when you look at a lawn area, and this is on the campus here, you see a pretty typical pattern of crabgrass emergence. Number one, you see it first and foremost right along the edges here of the sidewalk and maybe where people traverse, right? And so you see walking over there, maybe some bare turf, but then you see it sporadically through the lawn, and I know you can't see it very well, but then it's also dispersed more generally. You see it a little bit here. There's gaps. A lot of this is gaps. We got a steam line here that keeps this soil really warm, and you can see the crabgrass just absolutely loves that. But a lot of times we'll see crabgrass emerged out even into the sparsely open lawn. Now, one of the things that we've learned is if you've got a dense lawn that's competing with any grassy weed, you tend to get a lot of smaller plants. Many more smaller plants because they're fighting for the space and making their way through. And when they get up, they really can't emerge and get lateral plant growth, lateral leaf growth like a solar panel. But if you go to a bare area in something like this that's been worn out, you can see individual plants that, are like salad plants. They're like, toupees you can put on your head. And it's one plant, that'll produce 2,000 to 3,000 seeds. So if you have a dense lawn, you do not only get less weeds, in some cases, not always. Sometimes you get more weeds, but smaller. And in larger areas, you get less weeds, but bigger. So you've got to watch out the way you look at how plants emerge. And here's an example of what I mean. You know, in a thin turf, you can already start to see, you know, some of these plants getting fairly large, right? You have to understand something. Let's look at this plant right here. Let's look at this plant right down here. So here you've got the first plant. This is the youngest leaf here. First leaf, second leaf. Look how it becomes more lateral when it gets room. And you know, when a leaf can get lateral like that, man, it's sucking up the sunlight and producing and getting big. But let's get back to this. So this is the first plant here. And then this is a tiller, 1 tiller, 2 tiller, right? So this is a 3 tiller plant. 1, 2, 3. 3 tillers, right? Nice and easy. This is important because if your pre's don't work, which I predict again they won't, like many haven't over the last several years, it behooves you to learn the growth habits of these plants so that you can then employ the post-emergent strategies. All right, so what does the GDD tracker from Michigan State tell us about crabgrass germination? Well, it tells us that we're still way behind. If you look at the color scheme here, this is a color scheme that indicates still way behind. Oops, sorry. Let's go back. So we're still, this color is behind normal. This is still early, and this is prime time. And then there's another one that says, you know, it's all germinated. So we're just coming into this in the central Jersey area, right? Now, pre-emergent herbicides, when you apply them, put a barrier in place. But over time, that concentration goes from being a well-established barrier, right? This well-established barrier that as time goes on, degrades. It breaks down. It moves through the soil. It binds and ties itself up. There is some amount of a concentration that declines over time that then brings it to a point where weed seeds can germinate through it. So let's just do some basic stuff like we've done before. In general, this line with things like tenacity, baylan, treflan is generally at best, if you're lucky, it's 6 to 8 weeks. It could be 4 to 6 weeks, right? Where the longer herbicides like barricade or pendimethalin, prodiamine, and dithiopyr, right? You're now talking 12 to 14 weeks until you get to that degradation, right? But if you put it on in April 6th, let's say April, May, April, May, June, July, that's 12 weeks there. So April, so you're breaking down. When are most of them breaking down? Late July. Under best case, if you put it on, or early April. I mean, you'll be lucky if you make it to mid-July. Let's keep that in mind, that this barrier gets reached at different times. Now, here's when the same GDD tracker has just told us we are way late. If you haven't put on your pre-emergent crabgrass control in the metropolitan New York area, it's past, it's gone. You're really late in upstate New York. The Adirondacks would be the only place, and the northern reaches would be the only place it would still be good to have. In fact, the ideal time was about 3 weeks ago based on this tracker. So even using these models sometimes can be a little bit tricky. Now, here's what's worrying me. Really smart guys that I talk to on a very regular basis who train other really bright people like Matt Elmore are saying, even with pre-emergent herbicides, his Bermuda grass, now obviously this Bermuda grass gets inundated. On the right here, you see goosegrass problems beginning to emerge out in Martha's Vineyard on some of the sod we have out there. A lot of our herbicides don't work as well on goosegrass. So let's get into some of these emergence patterns, right? This is Mike Fidanza's work from the early 90s, where he was looking at the emergence of smooth crabgrass in College Park, Maryland. Now, one of the things about models that we're all getting used to and curves that we're all getting used to is that there's this period of time where time goes by and very little happens. And then boom, community spread happens, right? In this case, it's weed emergence. And you get this very rapid period of emergence, and then it sort of flattens off and a little bit more still occurs up here, right? So you don't get it all at once, but it does happen. The majority of it happens over about 200 days, right? About 200 days from the first 200 base. These are base, I think these are base 12C. So I'm not really worried about the temperatures. What I'm trying to say is that there's a period of time that, at least in Maryland, they showed in the early 90s, crabgrass emerges. Now, in Ontario, Canada, in 2008 and 9, they looked at a smooth crabgrass emergence in lawns as well. And they found, using a different model, that it behaved a similar way, but in the residential lawns that they were looking at, not in a research site where, they were looking at the way it emerged in gaps, but on real lawns, they showed something I thought very interesting, that this curve is even flatter, right? Now, let's go back here for a second, right? Now that we know about curves, right? We've learned a lot about curves. That's a steep curve, which means it's happening really quickly. And the folks in Canada are suggesting that it's a much more prolonged germination. Again, looking at growing degree days over a period of time and saying that, why is this important? It's important because if your pre-emergence breaks down here, right, when 80% emergence has occurred, there's still 20% more that can come on. Whereas if you just wait a little bit longer, let a little emergence occur, consider some strategies that could include organic and biologicals, then look at your pressure. If you're not getting a lot of pressure in the peak of the season because your turf management practices are going good, or you decide to do some post-emergence, there could be other ways to go here. All right, what have we learned? Well, my former graduate student, Chris Sitko, is out in Martha's Vineyard now, took samples on a golf course with a history of crabgrass pressure, sectioned it out, and wanted to see how much crabgrass pressure we were getting from the top 1 to 2 centimeters. So what is this? This is ½ inch, the first ½ inch, right? This is ½ to 1 inch, right? And then this is deeper than 1 inch. So we're only talking about, the shallow part of the soil. And we found crabgrass concentrations, or the amount of weed seeds in the top ½ inch. In fact, if you got the top inch, you got 98% of it. Now, as Joellen said, 98%, it ain't good for ticks, and it's not great for crabgrass, but it does really give you a lot more options with how you deal with it later on. Now, I'm not suggesting anyone go through and shave off the top inch of their ground. Aaron Patton, who we wanted to have with us today, has done a really nice job in putting together a nice guide of the different growth stages of smooth crabgrass that are really good for you to look at, commit to memory. And then with Matt Elmore's control strategies that he recommends at Rutgers, and I would encourage you to check these for how they work and their label recommendations in New York. But if you're thinking about what I just talked about it, with the way crabgrass emerges and releases and the kinds of control strategies you can employ, you can see that there's a number of programs that you can use, a number of products that you can use throughout the season. Now, check your labels and all the things that's involved in this. I'm not making recommendations. What I'm trying to do is give you ideas for strategies if by some reason you might expect your crabgrass program to fall apart again this year. This is when you'll start to see it during dry periods, but look at this is very fascinating. That fine leaf fescue that's under drought stress there, you can see that there's something that's preventing that crabgrass from growing in that fine leaf fescue, even though it's drying out. This is a patch of fine leaf fescue at a nursing home in Westchester County. And again, I watched it for a while. That fescue is able to keep out that crabgrass. I don't want to suggest it's a complete control, but I think it's the kind of thing we need to think more about. Are there other ways to control crabgrass than the blanketing pre-emergent herbicides? How about this phenomenon that we observed? High traffic areas, like the one on the right here, where carts drive regularly, crabgrass doesn't grow in it. Can we provide some traffic? Is there a way to create a situation where the grass will grow and the weeds will not? And so with that, Carl, I know I'm a little bit over, but I'm wondering if there are any questions that came up either for the ticks or for my little crabgrass rant there.
Yeah, definitely some questions about the crabgrass. Rich is asking a good question about phenological indicators. So he's asking about the forsythia. At what stage in the forsythia would that be a good indicator to go out and use your pre-emergent application?
Right. And I purposely didn't talk about phenological indicators because in general, they failed this year. They seem to be failing across the board this year. And I'm so glad you asked that question. Again, if you talk to Jerry Giordano, as we do every Thursday, he was telling us the forsythia was in bloom in late March, right? We were talking about forsythia in late bloom 6 weeks ago in bloom. And I think the bloom, some full bloom, is considered the ideal time to have your pre-emergence down. Now, the interesting thing about phenological indicators in the Ontario study that I cite, they had a frost that completely destroyed the bloom. So that trips you up. I do like them as indicators, but it's not it's not like you open it up and it's, this will happen every time. I think what we're learning about indicators and models and predictions is that they are informative tools that we should ground true. Like, hey, if it feels early, let me check the soil temperature. If the soil temperature is at 40 something and this thing's blooming, I don't think crabgrass is going to be germinating. So it seemed like the forsythia sat there for 4 weeks in Westchester County, I think, as Jerry reported as well. So you probably had 4 weeks to put it out if we were using just that indicator. What I'm trying to get us to avoid is, as soon as you see the bloom, run out and then complain in mid to late June, early July, when the lawns are full of crabgrass and the crabgrass now has a competitive advantage. You got no options. I'm arguing for, this is an important decision that we've just given over to the calendar or given over to an indicator and really are not doing enough of an understanding of the way the way the plants behave. Because hello, we never had to because the technology works so well. And hello, guess what? It's not working so well anymore. So maybe it's time to start thinking about this and understanding this in a different way.
Yeah.
I'm in a ranty mood today, Carl.
Hey, it's entertaining. I like the rainy mood. So Michael also has a good question. He's asking if you're going to get greater control by making smaller pre-emergent applications, but multiple apps. So for example, applying kind of in the early end of when you may apply at maybe a low rate and then going back in and, you're saying some products may degrade after 4 to 6 weeks or something.
Right.
Splitting up the app. What do you think about that?
Well, if you're, in the lawn care and grounds business, especially in the lawn care operator business, right, where it's very production oriented, they make, the majority of the income comes from applying materials to as many lawns as you possibly can, keep as many customers as you can. You have to get it done in a particular window. Historically, that window shrinks and, gets wider and narrower depending on weather conditions. There are some times when, it's cool and then boom, it's 80 degrees and it's 80 degrees and the window's really narrow, and other years like this year where the window's really wide. All right. So let's talk about it, set the context. If you were really early in the window and you think you're going to break down, yes, you should have some post-emergent materials available for control that you use based on growth stage, as Elmore suggests. And you have them in, dithiopyr and in phenoxyprop and in quinclorac. A little so you have them. They're not ideal. No one's going to say that a well-timed pre-emergent isn't the best way to control crabgrass. No one should say that. Some people would say, well, how about I wait, see how it comes up? I like dithiopyr or dimension. I can see it in the stage it's in behind me here. This is the 3-leaf stage. I'm sorry, the 3-tiller stage. You can almost get some control with dithiopyr. You can certainly get some post control with mesotrione. And what I like about them, the mesotrione or the, topramazone, Pilex, their pre-emergence activity is not very long nor great for crabgrass, but dithiopyr is really good too. So the answer to the question is, you can either wait, kill the ones when they're young. And in fact, there's some data from Matt Elmore that shows high rates of iron. Those iron chelates like Fiesta can work on young crabgrass in the early part of the season. And then there's the options later on, which include, once you get to 5-tiller and beyond, you're at quinclorac. And then there's this, let me show you. Then there's this weird growth stage here, right? There's this weird growth stage. Let's go to Aaron's thing here. There's this weird growth stage. I think I often hear Randy Prostak call it the teenage years. I believe it's somewhere in here in the 3 to 5 leaf stage. Quinclorac or drive doesn't work. So up here, you got dimension, you got mesotrione, right? You've got, of course, a claim. I know people that apply a claim every 2 weeks, which is a good strategy for maybe 2 or 3 years until your crabgrass becomes tolerant of phenoxyprop, which is likely to happen. So you have a few early ones here. You can use dimension a little bit later. And then after here, you're left with just a claim and quinclorac or drive. And really a claim gets really expensive and not as effective. You're really just left with quinclorac. And in New York State, it's hard to get the amount of quinclorac onto the plant that we need sometimes. So that's a long answer to how to use post and pre-emergence together.
No, good. And we did have one other question about pH and if crabgrass prefers a certain pH range. What do you know about that, Frank?
Well, I mean, there is some evidence that crabgrass can grow at pHs below 5.5, for example. There is some evidence that it does really well at 8.5 to 10. I've seen studies on chalkland pastures in, England. But I think the rule of thumb is this. My suggestion is, I don't know that there's a particular pH that crabgrass is more aligned to, except outside ranges we think our grasses do well. So I think the way to look at pH is, if your pH is limiting the performance of your existing stand of grass, and that's your primary defense for keeping annual grassy weeds out, then you want to make sure you're between 5.5 and 7.5, 7.8. I mean, I don't think there's much you can do when the pH gets too high. I think you have to accommodate some phosphorus and iron things there. And so that gets to be really difficult. But the low pH, you can line up into 5.5. If you're above 5.5 to 6, you're doing fine. And I don't see any reason why the crabgrass would be more predisposed down there.
All right. Well, it looks like we got all the questions today. Frank, again, thanks for taking us through some of the crabgrass stuff. I know it harkens back to your grad school days.
That must be why I got excited. I was all young again.
Yep. And of course, thank you, Joellen, for the tick information. I've put some links for everybody about tick management options, and also to a webinar coming up by Don't Get Ticked New York. That's on May 5th if you want a webinar talking really more in depth about ticks.
You want to see the pictures that Frank doesn't like to see, then comment with
they will scare you straight.
Yeah.
They'll scare you straight. And then one last thing before we go, I did send the link to the survey about these webinars again for everybody. So feel free to check that out, fill that out. It's only a minute or two. So
yeah, give us
with that,
feedback on the survey. Give us feedback on the survey. Very important. 6 weeks have gone by. We've done, what have we done, Carl? We've done 10 hours of total webinar stuff across the 3 sectors over 6 weeks.
We're getting close to 20 webinars here.
Yeah. So we want to know, is this of any use? Because it's certainly interesting to do. Takes time, of course, and energy and support to do. And as it continues to fill those needs, we want to do it, but we won't do it unless you tell us that it's really stinks and here's how you should make it better, or it's really good and, keep doing it. So thanks, Joellen, for joining us. Carl, as always, another great week in the books. See you guys.
Stay safe out there.
Everybody.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.